Since I was a child, I've lived in the shadow of my older brother Eric. Our family lived in a small house in Michigan. My parents, Laura and Peter, always gave Eric their full attention and support, while I, Lily, a 17-year-old girl, was often overlooked and dismissed. Eric, now 23, is 6 years older than me. To my parents, he was always the perfect child, and they did everything they could to give him whatever he wanted. My childhood memories are filled with moments when my parents prioritized Eric above all else. I remember when he was 16 and decided he wanted to learn how to play the guitar. Without hesitation, my parents bought him an expensive electric guitar and a high-end amplifier. He played for a few months before losing interest and abandoning it in the corner of the house. But that didn't stop my parents from supporting his next hobbies. From professional art supplies to a custom, expensive skateboard, they always catered to his passing interests without a second thought. Meanwhile, I never received the same attention. My birthdays were always overshadowed by bigger events for Eric. When I was 10, I remember clearly that Eric's birthday fell on the weekend before Christmas. My parents threw him a huge party, inviting many friends and relatives. They even bought him the latest gaming console he had been asking for. But by the time Christmas came around, all I got was a simple card that read, "Merry Christmas." I took no interest. Although I didn't have enough to eat, my parents told me they had spent too much money on Eric's birthday and didn't have anything left for my gift. This wasn't the first time, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. My birthdays each year consisted of a small store-bought cake and maybe a t-shirt or some school supplies. No parties, no special gifts, and definitely no attention. My parents always said they were busy, or that I needed to understand that Eric had bigger needs than I did. One day I asked my mom why Eric was always prioritized. She simply replied, "You're a good girl, Lily. You don't need much to be happy like your brother does." But that response didn't comfort me. Instead, it made me feel as though I wasn't worth their care. They didn't see me, didn't understand what I needed, and that left a deep void in my heart. Holidays, which should have been a time for family to come together, were painful reminders that I was always second to Eric. When I was 15, I spent hours making him a birthday gift, a painting I had created of him playing the guitar. But on my birthday a few months later, Eric didn't even remember. He just laughed and said, "Oh, it's your birthday, happy birthday," before going back to his phone. My parents said nothing, continuing with whatever they were doing, leaving me alone with the small cake they had hurriedly bought on their way home. These experiences made me realize that I couldn't rely on my parents for the same recognition or love they gave Eric. The constant favoritism shaped how I saw myself, my family, and my sense of worth. I understood that if I wanted to prove myself, I would have to do it on my own. In this family, I would never be their priority. After graduating from high school, I didn't expect anything from my parents. After years of living in Eric's shadow, I knew exactly where I stood in the family. But then, something unexpected happened. My parents suggested throwing a large birthday party for me. At first, I couldn't believe my ears. For 17 years, my birthdays had always been small affairs with just a simple cake and a basic gift, and now they were talking about inviting relatives and friends for a big celebration? Even more surprising, they seemed genuinely excited. "You deserve a special party," my mom said, her voice trying to sound casual but betraying a hint of awkwardness. Dad nodded in agreement, something rare in our conversations. "This is a big milestone, we should celebrate." I wanted to believe that they had finally realized how important I was. Maybe, after all the years of being overlooked, they had changed. But a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My parents weren't the type to suddenly become thoughtful and caring without a reason. The sudden shift made me suspicious. In the days that followed, I noticed my mom constantly making phone calls, speaking in hushed tones about ordering a birthday cake, finalizing the guest list, and arranging decorations. Dad busied himself fixing up the outdoor furniture in the backyard, something he had neglected for months. I offered to help, but my mom quickly brushed me off. "You don't need to worry about a thing. This is your special day. Just wait and enjoy it," she said. I wanted to believe her, but a nagging feeling lingered. My doubts were confirmed one evening when I overheard a conversation between my parents. Standing on the staircase, I listened as my mom spoke in a tense voice. "Peter, are you sure everything will be perfect? She's very particular. If we mess this up, we could lose everything." "We don't have a choice, Laura," my dad replied urgently. "She's criticized us several times for favoring Eric. We need to prove we care about Lily just as much. If we don't, we can kiss her financial help goodbye." Hearing those words made my heart sink. Suddenly everything became clear. This party wasn't for me. It was a staged performance, meant to impress Grandma Alice, the only person in the family who had always been on my side. All the excitement and meticulous planning I had seen were just part of an act to secure continued financial support from her. A wave of disappointment washed over me. Any hope that my parents had finally recognized my worth vanished. I was nothing more than a pawn in their game, a way to maintain their relationship with Grandma Alice. As hurt as I was, the thought of her warmth and support was the only thing that kept me going. I knew she truly saw me, in a way my parents never had. On the day of the party, the house was filled with laughter and chatter from relatives and friends. But I couldn't fully relax. Every time I saw my parents hovering around Grandma Alice trying to win her favor, I felt the bitterness of their deception. Even Eric didn't bother to show up. Yet, despite everything, I found solace in knowing that Grandma Alice's recognition was genuine. And as I humbly came to realize that Grandma Alice's recognition was genuine, at that moment I realized something important. The party, though orchestrated for ulterior motives, was an opportunity for me to affirm my own value. Not for my parents but for myself. I didn't need their approval to know my worth. I had already proven it by surviving and thriving despite their neglect. And with Grandma Alice by my side, I knew I was not invisible. I was seen, and that was enough. During the party, Grandma Alice stood up in the middle of the room, gently tapping her glass to get everyone's attention. I had no idea that moment would change my life. "Today we're not just celebrating Lily's birthday, but also honoring her remarkable achievements," she began, her warm, affectionate voice filling the room. I looked at her, my heart pounding as I saw the sincerity in her eyes. When she spoke again, she went on to talk about the effort I had put in over the years, studying hard and persevering despite the challenges of growing up in a family where I was treated unfairly. "Lily, you not only deserve recognition but also the opportunity to pursue your dreams," she said, before pulling an envelope from her purse. "And I want to help make that dream a reality." When I opened the envelope and saw the amount, $100,000, I could hardly believe my eyes. A wave of emotions washed over me: joy, relief, and above all, deep gratitude. I hugged her tightly, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, I felt truly seen and valued for the first time. But my happiness didn't last long. After the guests had left and I was carefully putting away the gifts, my parents called me downstairs to the living room. The atmosphere was heavy, and I quickly realized they weren't there to congratulate me. Eric was also present, his face dark and full of resentment. "Lily," my dad began, trying to sound calm but failing to hide the tension in his voice. "We need to have a serious talk about the money your grandmother gave you." I sat down, keeping my composure. "That money is for my tuition at Brinkton College," I replied, already suspecting where this conversation was headed. "We know that," my mom interjected, though she avoided meeting my eyes. "But Eric is in serious trouble. His business is on the brink of collapsing. You understand, don't you? Family is supposed to help each other." My chest tightened. They weren't even trying to hide their intentions. They wanted me to give up my chance to attend my dream college just to save Eric's failing business. The same Eric who had never truly cared about me. "I can't do that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Grandma gave me that money for college. This is my future." "You have a full scholarship at the state university," my dad countered, his tone more stern. "You can still go to college, but if Eric doesn't get that money, he'll lose everything." Eric finally spoke, his voice pleading. "Lily, you have to understand. My business is the future of this family. If you help me get through this, I promise I'll pay you back. I looked at them, disbelief flooding my mind. Eric's promise? I let out a bitter laugh. How many promises have you broken, Eric? And as for you two, I turned to my parents. You've never cared about what I wanted. Now that I finally have a chance to follow my dream, you want to take it away? To help Eric as always? The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. My dad suddenly stood up, his face flushed with anger. Lily, you're being incredibly selfish. Don't you understand that family comes first? If you refuse to help, don't blame us for turning our backs on you. I sat still, feeling like everything around me was collapsing. But deep down, I knew I couldn't back down. No, I said, my voice firmer than ever. This money is mine. Grandma trusts me, and I won't betray her trust. My parents hissed in frustration, and Eric began raising his voice in protest, but I didn't care anymore. I knew this was the moment I had to stand up for myself. I was no longer the girl who always had to sacrifice to please everyone else. This time I would protect my dream and my future, no matter what they said or did. After I firmly refused to give my money to Eric, the atmosphere in the house became more suffocating than ever. My parents didn't stop pressuring me, hoping I would change my mind. They constantly repeated that family always comes first. But to me, it was clear that family meant Eric. And I was always on the outside looking in. One evening, while I was in my room, the door suddenly opened. My dad stormed in, his face flushed with anger, his eyes blazing. Lily, this is your last chance, he said in a threatening tone. If you don't help Eric, don't expect to stay in this house another day. My heart tightened, but this time, fear didn't take over. I was too familiar with being overlooked and treated as if I didn't matter. My voice trembled slightly, but I held my ground. If that's the condition for staying here, then I don't need to stay, I replied. I won't sacrifice my future for Eric. My dad glared at me, his expression full of fury. Fine. If you walk out of this house, don't think about coming back. And don't expect any more support from us. He slammed the door behind him as he left, leaving me alone in the dark. I sat there for a long time, feeling as if my world was crumbling around me. But then, a surge of determination rose within me. This was my moment to choose my own path. If I stayed, I would forever be trapped under their control. If I left, I would finally have the chance to take control of my life. I began packing my things. I gathered my important documents, my birth certificate, diploma, and ID, placing them in a small backpack. The $100,000 check from Grandma Alice was carefully stored in a hard-covered notebook tucked inside my dresser drawer. I packed a few clothes, my laptop, and about $200 in savings from my part-time job at the library. As I looked around my room one last time, I felt no regret. This had never truly been my home. That night, I quietly left the house. My parents and Eric were already asleep, and I moved silently, careful not to wake them. Stepping outside, the cold night air wrapped around me, but I felt freer than I ever had. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer. A place where I was constantly devalued. I walked to the nearby bus station and bought a one-way ticket to Massachusetts, where Grandma Alice lived. I knew she was the one person who would understand and accept me. During the journey, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The pain of my parents' threat still lingered, but alongside it was a new sense of hope. This was the first time I had truly stood up for myself, and despite the challenges, I didn't regret it. When I arrived at Grandma Alice's house the next morning, I couldn't hide my anxiety. I feared she wouldn't believe me, that she might listen to my parents' lies. But when she opened the door and saw me, her eyes were filled with concern and love. "Lily, what are you doing here? What happened?" she asked, pulling me inside. I sat down and told her everything, from the pressure my parents put on me to give the money to Eric, to the threat that I'd be kicked out of the house. When I mentioned how my dad had gripped my wrist in anger, Grandma Alice was silent for a long moment. Her face shifted from worry to anger, But that anger was never directed at me. "You did the right thing, Lily," she finally said, her voice steady and resolute. "They have no right to take your future away from you. From now on, you'll stay here with me and I will protect you." I broke down in tears, but this time, they were tears of relief. I knew I had found a safe place. Someone who would always stand by me. Despite the pressure and betrayal from my parents and Eric, I felt that I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. Life at Grandma Alice's house felt like a refreshing breeze after the suffocating years at my parents' home. Every morning I woke up to the comforting scent of coffee and the aroma of apple cookies she baked. Her small house in Massachusetts radiated warmth and peace, a stark contrast to the constant tension I had endured. She never asked about what had happened between me and my parents, but through her gentle care and understanding gaze, I knew she understood everything. I spent the summer preparing for my new journey at Brington College. During those days, Grandma Alice and I often sat at the dining table, making plans and sharing stories. She helped me shop for school supplies, prepare my enrollment paperwork, and even offered thoughtful ideas on how to decorate my dorm room to make it feel like home. "Lily, you're a smart and strong young woman. Never let anyone make you doubt your worth," she said one day, when I expressed nervousness about starting at a new school. When move-in day arrived, Grandma Alice drove me to campus, bringing along a few large bags and a box of homemade cookies for me and my roommate. Brington College was perched on a tree-covered hill, surrounded by historic buildings and a lively atmosphere. My initial anxiety faded quickly, as I realized this was where I truly belonged. The first few weeks at Brington flew by like a whirlwind. I threw myself into my classes with enthusiasm, made new friends, and discovered opportunities I had never imagined. I quickly bonded with my roommate Rachel, a cheerful and friendly girl who made me feel at ease from the moment we met. We spent many weekend evenings studying or watching movies together, building a friendship that I came to deeply cherish. In addition to my studies, I joined the school newspaper, where I found a new passion for writing. I began contributing articles on student life and social issues, and my work gradually gained attention and praise from both peers and professors. With each small success, my confidence grew, and I became more excited about the future. Yet, there were moments when I missed Grandma Alice. Every evening, I called her to share the day's events, from meeting a strict but supportive professor, to the exhilaration of giving my first presentation in front of a large class. She always listened attentively and encouraged me, making me feel as though she was right there beside me. One October afternoon, I received my midterm grades, all shining A's. Overwhelmed with joy, I immediately called Grandma Alice. Through the phone, I heard her proud voice. "I knew you could do it, Lily. You are your own light, and you deserve all the wonderful things coming your way." I realized then that my success wasn't just a product of my own effort. It was also built on the foundation of her trust and love. The days of living under favoritism and pressure at my parents' house were now distant memories. I was no longer the girl who constantly sought recognition. I had become a confident, resilient woman, ready to face any challenge ahead. I knew I had found my own path, a path I could walk with freedom and unshakable belief in myself. Eric's business collapsed completely just a few months after I left home. I heard the news through phone calls from relatives and whispers from old acquaintances. Eric, once my parents' greatest hope, had to move back into his old room at my parents' house, a place he had once looked down on and left to pursue his big dreams. My parents, who had invested everything in him, now faced the heavy consequences of decisions they had believed were right. I heard that my mom had to sell off her precious jewelry collection, which she had proudly shown off during holiday gatherings. My dad, nearing 60, took on a part-time job at a local supermarket to help pay off debts. The house they once boasted about, with its spacious backyard, had fallen into disrepair due to lack of funds for maintenance. But the most surprising thing was Eric himself. Someone who had never understood the meaning of responsibility. Having the audacity to continue asking for their support, without a hint of guilt. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of bitterness as I heard about their situation. A part of me wanted them to realize the mistake of their favoritism, But another part felt sad for what had become of our family. I couldn't forget the years they had neglected me, the quiet birthdays, the thoughtless Christmas gifts, and the cold indifference I endured simply because I wasn't Eric. Now, ironically, it was Eric, their golden child, who was dragging them down. Yet my parents still refused to give up on him. They kept trying to reach out to Grandma Alice, hoping she would rescue them from their financial troubles. One day, Grandma told me about an unexpected visit from my parents. They came pleading for help, saying they would lose everything without my support, she said, her eyes weary. They still don't understand that this isn't. Grandma firmly refused to help them. Lily, you know something? She continued. Sometimes, the only way for people to learn their lesson is to let them face the consequences of their actions. I felt more grateful to her than ever. She had not only saved me from the unfairness of my family, but had also given me the opportunity to step out and build a life of my own. Although I tried to focus on my new life at Brington College, updates about my family situation occasionally reached me. I heard that Eric was considering a new business venture, an online electronics store. But instead of taking initiative, he was still relying on my parents for support, despite their near total exhaustion, both financially and emotionally. When I heard these things, I no longer felt anger or bitterness. Instead, I felt relieved to be free from that cycle. I realized that, no matter how many mistakes they continued to make, I was no longer responsible for bearing the consequences. That was the freedom I had earned, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Looking back, I knew Grandma Alice was right. My parents and Eric needed to face reality, to truly understand the value of responsibility and love. I was no longer living in their shadow. Now I was free to pursue my dreams and build the life I wanted, one that was no longer shaped by the mistakes of others. Looking back on my journey, I've come to understand that putting myself first isn't selfish. It's a necessary step to break free from the toxic cycles my family created. My life now is completely different from what I once knew. I'm no longer held back by favoritism or the feeling of being invisible. Instead, I live independently, confidently and happily, thanks to the unwavering support and belief of my grandmother Alice. I live at my grandmother's house. And with you, from the start of life. At Brington College, I found the best version of myself. I continued to excel academically, earning a scholarship for my second year, and even being invited to join the school's special research program. I felt a deep sense of pride as I reflected on the days when I doubted whether I could succeed. Through perseverance and the faith Grandma Alice instilled in me, I learned that anything is possible when you're willing to step out of your comfort zone. My relationship with Grandma Alice grew stronger with each passing day. During every school break, I returned to Massachusetts, where her small house was always filled with warmth and laughter. We spent our time cooking, gardening, and discussing my future plans. She listened to all of my ideas, whether it was about articles I was writing for the school newspaper or my plans to intern at a major publication in New York. My friends knew I missed Alice highlier than I ever told them in the past. "You can do anything you set your mind to, Lily," she would say, her eyes shining with pride. "I've always believed in you." Of course, not everything was easy. There were still moments when I thought about my family, not because I wanted to go back, but because I wished things could have been different. I knew my parents and Eric were struggling with the consequences of their choices, and a small part of me occasionally felt pity for them. But then I would remember all the years I was pushed aside, all the times I sought their approval, only to be met with indifference. Those memories strengthened my conviction that I was on the right path. A path I had chosen, and now controlled. As I entered my final year at Brington, a sense of peace and fulfillment washed over me. I had not only discovered myself through academics and new relationships, but had also learned to love and value who I was. I knew that my success was not just the result of personal effort, but also the product of Grandma Alice's priceless support. She showed me that my worth didn't lie in pleasing others. It lay in who I was and what I could achieve. During the graduation ceremony, as I walked across the stage to receive my honors degree, my eyes quickly found Grandma Alice in the crowd. She sat in the front row, her face glowing with pride and a radiant smile. I realized then that she had been the one to change my life. She had given me the chance to escape a destructive cycle and write my own story. When our eyes met, I smiled and silently whispered, "Thank you, Grandma, for everything." Now, I have fully stepped into the life I was meant to live, free from unfair expectations and unreasonable standards. I'm working at a major publication, writing stories that inspire others, just as my own story once changed my life. And whenever I reflect on how far I've come, I remind myself that the freedom, independence, and happiness I have now aren't acts of selfishness. They are the result of learning to love myself and refusing to accept anything less than what I deserve. Not only do I have more freedom in my life, but I also have more peace and calm now, because I've taken possession of my own heart. This story highlights the importance of putting yourself first and refusing to accept injustice in any relationship, even within your family. Favoritism and unfair treatment can leave deep emotional scars, but we always have the right and the power to change our lives. Sometimes, stepping away from toxic relationships isn't selfish. It's necessary to discover your self-worth. Be strong in pursuing your dreams, because only by loving and believing in yourself can you truly achieve happiness. What are your thoughts on this story? What lessons do you take away from Lila's family experience? Don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss more heartwarming and meaningful stories about life, family, and the journey to find happiness.